The following is an Operation Podcast production.
Loss of a relationship was the most catalytic way of me discovering, the illusion that I was caught in, creating a fair degree of depression and anxiety and all the things. And at that same moment, simultaneously, I recognized that the very nature of life is uncertainty. Can you hold compassion for yourself to start with? That it's okay. It's okay that you feel like a loser because your husband, wife left you, your kids don't talk to you, you got fired. These are all very normal experiences as a human being. So investigate as best as you can the correlation between the you that you are for yourself and the problems that by virtue of that perspective are being created because of the way you look at life. So life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free.
I think that there's such power in having the awareness that you can bring people around to the truth.
When you realize, oh, hang on a minute, I am my own worst enemy, not my circumstances, and the degree to which I carry a frequency of fear, disdain for myself, the absence of love and kindness is the precursor to how that actually starts to get manifest in my real life, right? That's a beautiful question. I've never had that posed to me.
Hey, y'all, we've got another episode of Look at Me Now ready for you. This one, I'm sitting down with Peter Crone, the mind architect, and you do not want to miss this.
Are you ready for a wild ride? I'm Alexis Artin, and I invite you to strap in because this is more than a podcast. This is Look at Me Now.
I'm just so grateful to have you sitting here with me today. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure and an honor, and I appreciate the kind words.
Of course. I mean, there's going to be probably many more as we continue
I'm
in our
okay with that. I can handle that. Kansas is going bye-bye, apparently.
We are not in Kansas anymore. So the way that I always like to begin this podcast is by looking backward on the timeline.
Yeah.
And looking at sort of the imprints of what led to the work that you're doing now, the human being, this magnificent superhuman that you are now. So looking back though, oftentimes, I say this a lot, our mess becomes our message.
Yes.
And I'm so curious about your history in terms of, what your origin story is and what led up to, starting from, I know we do a lot of inner child work per se. Tell me your inner child story, your origin story.
Well, thank you for your interest. And I think it's important to, whilst I appreciate the flattery, like a superhuman introduction, I definitely am cognizant of, grateful for my humanity too, right?
Absolutely.
So I just don't want anyone to think they're in any way less than, but
I tip my hat to that. Thank you.
Yeah, because I think it's important, and I've seen this with so many people that I've been iconic figures in my childhood or through my teen years, 20 years, when we really struggle with identity crisis and going through college and the pressures and all the things that we encounter just by virtue of this human journey. And sadly, sometimes they say never meet your heroes, right? And oftentimes I have seen that, cliche come to life where it's just disappointing when people that you admire and then you realize that they've gotten caught up in their own identity and they're holier than thou. And there's sort of this tyrannical perspective where they are sometimes unbeknownst to themselves putting glass ceilings on everyone else. As long as they can keep you just a little less than, then it keeps their ego alive. So I think I fell prey to that early in my 20s whilst I was being, acknowledged in a different way for my academia accomplishments or whatever I was doing at the time. And I for sure was somebody who, like all of us, was enjoying the accolades. But I realized, hang on a minute, I'm starting to lean on that too much. So life has, as it always does, humbled me over the last couple of decades to go, hey, okay, you might have a message that is changing, fortunately, the lives of millions of people, and that's very gratifying, but you're still a human. And so
absolutely.
Not to, expand on that too much, but I really, it's weird. I like that part of myself that despite the attention and the number of people that sort of seem to stop me these days with just tears in their eyes and how I changed their life, I recognize, and I always say, I didn't, you did. I might have said something to inspire it, but I acknowledge you for changing your life. And I just, it's nice for me to be able to, one, see that about myself, and two, continue to reiterate it. So I don't, back in the UK, I don't get too big for my britches, as they would say.
It's really interesting because I say that a lot to my clients.
Yeah.
When I feel like they displace a certain amount of success or gratitude on, they outsource it. They give the power to me, or the massive amounts of successes that they have. When they celebrate them, they don't really own them fully as their own.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't do the work. I mean, perhaps we had a conversation that unlocked some insights, but you had those insights and you did the work to impart them. And I think that is, goes hand in hand with what you're talking about in terms of other people, that if we give them that power, they do put the glass ceilings on us.
Yeah.
They do hold the keys in a lot of ways when we let them, as to what's possible for us.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious what led you into, because you've already admitted, and I've heard you say on other podcasts, that you had your own challenges growing up, and it's the realizations that you had as a result of those challenges that have led you into the understanding that you have now about not just how to overcome them for yourself, but helping other people do that. Yeah. Can you walk me through what maybe, like, was there one aha moment when you went, oh my God, I've committed myself to this suffering, but it's just a story I've attached myself to, and I'm embarking on a different path now, a different possibility for myself? Was it a thousand little moments that led up to evolution and change? For
sure. And I think that piggybacks off your first question, which I didn't address. I just wanted to, express gratitude for the superhuman comment, but simultaneously make sure that people don't think, that I'm too full of myself.
Yeah.
So the question of, like, sort of the genesis of my work and where I became Peter Crone, the mind architect, which piggybacks on the second question, was, for sure, there was a pivotal moment when I was, around 29, which for those who study astrology is Saturn return, and that's usually kind of a chapter change for most humans in that window, 29 to 31. And my story that really became the catalyst for this perspective that, for me, subjectively, was the most powerful thing I went through, but simultaneously the precursor to my career, or at least for now, was when I was in a relationship with a woman who, for me, was the first experience of something that I could, at the time, qualify as somebody I was contemplating spending my life with. Like, it was that I'd had love, puppy love, teenage love. I was a late bloomer, so I didn't really have girlfriends, so I was much older, but you have the best semblance of what you think love might represent. But this really felt like, okay, there's sort of some maybe potential soul contract with this person. So I really kind of went all in, and this was someone I met. Actually, I was working in Australia at the time. I was a trainer in my former career to a couple of VIP actors. And there was a whole series of events that transpired that in of themselves, each pivotal moments of insight that I got. But to cut to the chase, the story was that she eventually acquiesced, became my girlfriend, moved to LA. We lived in Madrid together for a minute because I was helping this couple. One of them was filming there, and we went through this beautiful arc of any kind of relationship that hopefully is founded on these shared principles of kindness and passion and all the things and adventure. And then at the time I moved back to the States. And one day she turned around and said, I'm leaving, which for somebody in my disposition that I was oblivious to at the time, but as part of my story, was very jarring and also very upsetting. And so anyway, she went on her way, and I really struggled for the first, especially 2 or 3 weeks. Like, I couldn't sleep. I started to lose weight, desperate men doing desperate things, which my iteration of that was calling everyone I knew, trying to get advice, calling my buddies, like, how do I get it back? And whilst she stayed in touch for a couple of weeks, checking in once or twice a week, just whatever, there were some logistical things, like usually in a relationship you have to reconcile and finish off, but I was still waiting for that moment of like, oh, I'm coming back, or, and it never transpired, thankfully, because it ended up being sort of the catalyst for my awakening of sorts. And anyway, so then the next 5 or so weeks, I was in my silo of deep suffering and contemplation. I can remember even waking up one night in the middle of the night, literally screaming out loud to myself, "Shut up!" Like, which was, not too flattering comment towards my egoic ruminations of like, where is she? Will I see her again? Is she dating someone else? Like these incessant questions that created so much angst and suffering, which hopefully most people can relate to, because I think for me, at least, relationships, and in this case, the loss of a relationship was the most catalytic way of me discovering, the illusion that I was caught in, which this led to, because one day, as I said, about probably less than 2 months or so after she had actually gone, those questions were still rumbling around in my skull and creating a fair degree of depression and anxiety and all the things. But I suddenly got the answer to all the questions in this sort of Sartori type moment, which is that, where is she? Is she dating someone else? Will I see her again? Will I have love like that again? And I realized the answer to all of them was the same, which was, I don't know. And those 3 words, like the freedom that cascaded through my body was like nothing I'd ever experienced. I didn't know was even available to me.
Hey, y'all, I'm so excited to announce my partnership with Timeline Nutrition. As you know, I am a cancer survivor, and I am always looking for any edge for longevity and wellness. And this Swiss life science company has spent 10 years in research and development, infusing their products with urolithin A, which is a mitochondrial function improver. Their MitoPure is my favorite of their products, but every one of their products is infused with this magical urolithin A, which improves cellular energy, muscle strength, endurance, decreases inflammation, and ultimately removes the damage in your mitochondrial cells. This is magic in a box. Please go to www.timelinenutrition.com/LAMN10 to get your discount on these life-saving, life-changing products.
And at that same moment, like simultaneously, I recognized that the very nature of life is uncertainty. Like just as, people recognize fire as hot, like they're synonymous, I realized that life is uncertain. And the whole psychological warfare that people are stuck in between past, present, and future, even Einstein said, they're just nothing but persistent illusions. And so I was like the human disposition with a brain that we all have that's designed to predict and protect, which is a survival mechanism, was always trying to figure out. And in this case, it was exacerbated and exaggerated by the occurrence of loss, which was really picking back on unresolved trauma from when my mum died at 7. She wasn't 7, I was 7. And at 17, my dad went to work and never came back. And I was an only child. So I was orphaned by the age of 17. No one would begrudge me the fact that I had a narrative that was pretty firmly entrenched in the idea of loss, anything of value. This girl representing the new version of value as an adult now. And so I, in ways that I hadn't recognized during the relationship, my compensation, my coping strategy was to be the perfect boyfriend, right? That seemed like, oh, that's cool. That's a way to avoid loss, right? And hopefully, again, many can relate to that, especially women these days. There's so much pressure on appearance. But so it all just fell apart at that moment. I realized, holy shit, like I had become somebody who, through no fault of my own, it's all one of my quotes, and maybe you're familiar, I write in quotes and I say, you can't be held accountable for that which you're oblivious to. So there was no guilt and shame, but I was nonetheless both oblivious but responsible for the fact that I had, as a strategy, upped the ante on what was otherwise a really good guy. I was actually a loving boyfriend and a generous, and I would give flowers and poems for no reason. But there was it was Peter plus, right? It was like, okay, she loved me for me. She didn't care. But it was me that had the feeling that I had to be a little extra, which was the compensation for trying to avoid the pain that I was still carrying with me, which was I don't want to lose her, because I actually hadn't mitigated the pain from my parents. So that was that big aha moment that I just sat there in my little shitty rent control apartment with everything that I owned in a 200 square foot room. And I was like, oh my God, like I felt totally free. And I was not only recognizing the nature of life uncertain, I realized that I had done everything I'd done. Again, no guilt or shame. It was all well intended. It was just basically a little kid who was scared of losing something that meant something to him. But the most powerful part for me in terms of understanding energy and the quantum entanglement that we all have as humans being, unified, even though it's a very strong illusion that we're separate, was that within about 10, 15 minutes of me having that revelation, my phone rang, landline at that point on my desk, and I picked it up and it was her. And I hadn't spoken to her for 5-6 weeks. And now she's crying, saying she misses me so much, which is all I was desperately hoping to hear, of course, when I was stuck in the sort of illusion of my own separation and loss. I had literally at that moment become a different human being, and for the first time truly available, which is, she loved me for me, you know, but I was too busy trying not to lose her even though she was there. So that simultaneously, I got all of these downloads and never looked back. I had a dinner appointment that night with some friends, walked around 3 or 4 blocks from my place, and I never felt like I even touched the sidewalk. So that was the big epiphany. And I was simultaneously totally okay for the first time in my life, not knowing what was going to happen, which, you know, in lay terms, we could say was the quintessential form of trust or faith. If it's for some people, they lean on a religion or whatever it is. But yeah, and then to your question, there were thousands of little micro steps that have happened subsequently to help reinforce it and different iterations of it. But yeah.
I just had so much populate for me as I was downloading everything that you were saying. And the first is that we all have these survival strategies, and we are all either trying to get away from what we don't want or get closer to what we do. Yeah. And so much of that is really from a default place, not the place of, I believe that we arrive in this world in homeostasis. I believe that we come here as this unconditional love bubble human thing, which is why nobody could look at a baby and go, oh, baby's not going to amount to much. Like you just turn into a puddle of love when you see this adorable, precious infant creature. Yeah. But I think that, you know, our bodies are very animalistic. Yes. And it's that sort of like reptilian brain, if you will, the amygdala that hijacks us and sends us into, you know, a state of how are we going to survive? How are we going to stay safe? How are we going to thrive and get ahead? Right. Yeah. And that's where all the quote unquote problems begin. Yeah. But when you were sharing your story, I had this moment of realization. I actually haven't thought about this in a while, but I was in my early 20s and I was suicidal, and I was in the shower and I was in a ball on the floor, just crying and envisioning that I was going to get out of the shower and I was going to go swallow a handful or a bottle of pills, and I was going to lay in my bed and I was just going to go. Yeah. And then I thought a little deeper, and I thought, okay, well, I wonder what it'll be like and how it'll feel. And I wonder who's going to find me. Yeah. And then eventually my thoughts trailed into, I wonder who's going to get my stereo. Are they going to fight over my stereo? Who's going to get my CD collection? Because it's pretty good. Yeah. And then I remember thinking to myself, well, wait, like if I'm gone and all this settles out in the end, and this person has my stereo and this person has my CD collection, and well, then what's going to happen to all of my like legitimate problems? The ones that I'm sitting here not seeing a way out of other than to just end it. Yeah. And I went, well, they would just disappear. They wouldn't exist anymore. Right. But that must mean that they're not real. The stereo's real because it stays. Somebody's going to take that on. Yeah. But who's going to take on my problems? Yeah. Nobody. Because they can't be handed over. They're not real. Yeah. And I feel like that was my moment, my aha moment of really grasping what you're saying. Yeah. The availability of real, it created a freedom in me where my feet didn't touch the ground that night. Yeah. And I can only like ever encapsulate that as saying awareness is our superpower. I wasn't aware of it the moment that I sat down and decided to swallow pills. And as soon as I became aware of it, all the possibilities in my world changed. Yeah. And the fact that you say like, you know, the word oblivious, right? We can't do anything about something we're not privy to. Yeah. We're oblivious to it. So I guess my question to you is, you know, as you've made your way into the person that you are now and the work that you're doing now, which I want to talk a little bit more about. Sure. when you talk about somebody's capacity, right? Their capacity for having the moments like we had, where we have these grand awarenesses that pivot and change everything in the terms of the world of possibility and freedom for us.
Yeah.
What is your understanding of helping someone get to that place of seeing the unseen, of removing the oblivion and stepping into a greater awareness of themselves and what's possible for them outside of those limiting beliefs?
Like in terms of what is the process, or how can people kind of...
Yeah, if somebody's listening to this and going, I can't see any other way. I can't see any other possibility for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to start and lead with compassion, because having been there myself, it's one thing to go through the trenches of our own suffering and unpacking traumas, some of which many people just for pure survival and coping strategies forget, suppress, repress, deny. So I always like to start with, acceptance at a really deep, unconditional level. And I think that's why so many people, and especially the types of people that find me, find solace and comfort in my counsel, is because I really genuinely come from a place of non-judgment, which itself is an anomaly in this world, especially now where there's so much heightened judgment, cancel culture, everyone's offended by everything. So I think if I could sort of superimpose that onto whoever's dealing with something, is like, can you hold compassion for yourself to start with? That it's okay. It's okay that you're suicidal. It's okay that you're depressed. It's okay that you feel pointless, hopeless sensations towards life. It's okay that you feel like a loser because your husband, wife left you, your kids don't talk to you, you got fired. These are all very normal, I wouldn't say necessarily natural, but normal experiences as a human being. So I think that's a place to start, as compassion for self. And then hopefully everybody at least has somebody in their life. They don't typically have to even be a family member that can hold space and just listen from that same space, right? Because I think this is something women afford each other so well, is the capacity to really get one of their girlfriends, their sisters, their mums, their daughters' perspective in a way that they don't feel the need to do anything about it, but just really have compassion and sympathy. And like, I'm sorry, honey, you're having that kind of day, and I get it. And, there's often a bit of physical touch, which is healing, like you hold someone, you hug someone. So whoever's listening and struggling right now, first of all, I send so much love, and I have total understanding and sympathy, and it's okay. It's okay. And if they can then, by extension, whether it's from me or someone around them, afford themselves that same sense of, it's okay, this is part of your path, and perhaps life is asking you to embody a little bit more love and compassion for yourself, because most people kind of suck at that.
Yes,
we're good at extending it to others, but most people struggle to have it for themselves.
Yes.
So that's the first place, and often is in of itself sufficient, to deal with whatever the perceived problem is. Like to your point about, I loved your story of the realization, the awareness of from stereos going to somebody to problems not going to somebody. And okay, well then they must at some level be fictitious. And I would actually assert they're real, but they were associated with you, right?
Correct.
The problems only exist relative to the persona. And so when you die, your problems die by virtue of their commensurate with the identity and the view that you have.
That I had created for myself, sure.
Yeah, so that's really powerful for people to see. So maybe there's also something in that for people right now listening, is start with compassion, and then 2, investigate as best as you can the correlation between the you that you are for yourself and the problems that by virtue of that perspective are being created because of the way you look at life. And perhaps, just perhaps, if you really want to be powerful and take ownership and responsibility, that without guilt or shame, those problems really are yours and they belong to the you that you currently see yourself. And who could you be if those problems didn't exist might be the next iteration of you, right? So for me, when I work with people, I use their perceived problems external to reverse engineer into what are these subcontext or subconscious prisons, as I refer to them, that you must live in for that problem to even have some existence, right? And that's not always easy. You need someone who can listen well, but if someone's struggling about health, wealth, relationships, whatever it is, I promise you there's an underlying foundation that's based in a lie about that you're not something, you're not good enough, you're not loved, you're not wanted, you're not safe. And so that's the invitation, is that life is, one of my more popular quotes that people love is I say, life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. So whatever someone's up against right now, life is presenting you with a circumstance or someone or someone's who is showing you where you're not free. So if you can reframe it, recontextualize, it's actually an opportunity to discover freedom, which to me is akin to love, possibility, joy, vitality. So it's a gift, we're beneficiaries of life, not victims of it. And so the degree to which right now, as much as it might seem so difficult and pointless and who cares and no one gives a fuck, I've been there myself, there's something that's asking to be both born, but also die in the way that you're currently under the illusion that you're somehow inadequate or there's a feeling of scarcity or insecurity. So
I love that. I mean, everybody who listens to me ever knows that I'm such a huge proponent of balance. For as much shadow, there will be equal light. And anytime that we're fixated on a one-sided existence, we're missing half of it. And when we see the whole, and we're in perfect balance, then we see the harmony and we see the high divine order in what is perceived chaos, right? But I love that you're saying that your work is you're looking for the glitch in the mind matrix that we all live in our own mind matrix. Yeah. And when we find the glitch, we can dissolve it. And I think that there is nothing more freeing than that to your point. That is where total freedom resides. And so tell me a little bit more about in your present day experience, what is it that you feel most on fire about in terms of the work that you're doing, the people that you're helping, the premises that you're teaching people about, which are not pervasive? Because you and I share some very similar mindsets and approaches and belief systems, and they're not always popular.
No.
So can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, the first part in terms of what I'm excited about, I just was on a 20-day whirlwind tour. I went to Monaco for the Grand Prix Formula One with some clients, which was fun, a bit of a shit show. And, it's a yacht measuring contest, particularly between the males, which is always fun to see. And yet inspiring to be around that level of performance because I've worked with a ton of athletes and that's sort of the elite, obviously, within that world of racing. And then I went to Europe. I was in 4 countries in one day. I went from Monaco to Nice to fly to Amsterdam for brunch with a friend at Soho House and took a train to Belgium and Antwerp for dinner with my family. I only have one living relative left, my mum's brother, my uncle. And so that really lit me up in a way that I hadn't seen them for 7 or 8 years. And even though, I'm no spring chicken anymore, so arguably I could have had these more profound conversations about my childhood and my parents, many times, and I've had some, but it was different this time. I really wanted to better understand my mom. What was she like as a little girl? To my uncle, to share some of the things he went through. How was she in her teens? How many boyfriends did she have before she met my dad? Like, what did she have passions about? Because she died of cancer, and I also wanted to know what that journey was like. And so that really was very... It was like a sort of a hero's journey to a certain degree, to use Joseph Campbell's term of like, I left Europe, come to America, so far done pretty well for myself, go back to these roots where they're literally living in the same houses as, I did visit when I was a kid. So there's sort of so much this reminiscing of the times that I was a little boy running around the corridors of this house. And
a look at me now moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were so proud, and they have continued to be so over the years. Obviously there's communication, emails, texts and stuff, but to actually sit and in a very conscious way want to understand, and very much inspired by my ex-girlfriend of late, who was so family oriented, and I'm so grateful to her and her incredible commitment to her family. And she said, look, okay, you might be an orphan, you might not have a big family, but you have an uncle and he's not young. And so, that really moved me to make some commitments, take action. And I happened to be going to Europe, so I included that. So that lit me up in a way that I'm still integrating, because I literally got back yesterday, because after Belgium, I flew to Dallas, where I was speaking at a biohacking conference for Dave Asprey's group. And then I went from there to Cancun as a friend and guest of Joe Dispenza for his week-long retreat meditation. So it's sort of the juxtaposition of like the completely obnoxious material world of Formula One and the the concentration of wealth in this city of Monaco, to revisiting my history, to how you started this podcast of look where you've come from, and sort of dipping my toe back into these formative years of my childhood, and then to go to this futuristic kind of biohacking, how are we going to create longevity in our meat suits, and then to end it sort of doing the deep dive in these hours of meditation. So I'm still processing, and I like to take time when I get back. But all of that, to answer your question, has lent itself to, my gratitude for wherever I went, on a yacht, $300 million yacht, where people are running around, with very little clothing or a lot of bling, whichever, pick your poison. And the thing that moved me the most was a guy came up to me, borderline in tears, and said, your work has changed my life. And I'm sitting in the middle of Monaco, or sitting in the water in Monaco. And, he asked me to be involved with someone he works with who's a very big recording artist, a woman who speaks out about mental health. And they're doing something with Eckhart Tolle. And he said she would love to do something with you. So it's so weird how that came to bear when I'm in the middle of somewhere that you might not necessarily associate that to being stopped endlessly at the biohacking conference, the same. And then even in Cancun, the very first morning I sat down for breakfast by myself. A guy walks past me. He's probably like mid-50s, an older guy. He's from Germany. And he said, oh my God, he said, sorry, but you look just like Peter Crone. And I said, well, it's funny that I hear that a lot, because I am. And he just literally started shaking and crying. And he said, you have no idea how you may have, certainly changed, but maybe saved my life. And so all of that has sort of come together in a way that it's really, in ways that I knew but didn't know. I get stopped a lot nowadays, and it's still very, not jarring, but it's very humbling and flattering. But it's really inspired me to want to give more, to do more, to share more and get out more, and even travel, because I became a little bit avoidant of travel, where I'd been working with so many professional athletes, going to games, baseball games, golf tournaments, back and forth, predominantly in the States, but it was starting to wear on me. So I was like, I became such a homebody. I'm sort of quintessential Virgo. I'm happy to be quiet, but simultaneously got some Leo, so I'm totally comfortable in the spotlight. So it's kind of a nice balance where I think that keeps my humility in check. But to do this little journey has sort of really, because we're getting so many people asking me, come to Australia, come to Germany, do this event in Spain. A place in Italy wants me to do a retreat. And I'm really excited to reach more people, to make a difference. I know how hurt people are out there, how much suffering there is. Not that I've been oblivious, but I just feel like it's somehow being exacerbated or heightened. And the last few years with all the pandemic, whatever you want to call it, I just feel like people need help. And so that's what I'm excited about. Finish my book that I have been talking about for about 15 years. It's pissing people off. Although now I think it's a pretty smart strategy, because wherever I go, people are like, when's your book coming out? When's your book? So I've got some good pre-sales happening just by having spoken about it for so long.
Yeah.
So that, and then, so that's really lighting me up, is to do more, share more, get more out there, complete more. The book, I've got a lot of programs I'm working on. I just did my mastermind. People are FOMOing about it. They're like, when's the next mastermind? My 3-month container that's so powerful, and the community gets born out of that. People are meeting all around the world and, sharing in the work. And so I feel pretty jazzed for someone whose body should be jet lagged. I fortunately got a good night's sleep last night, but I'm just feeling more than anything grateful. And I often say I feel like I'm the luckiest man alive, because even in the face of all the loss that we could argue I've been through, and not having family or people that have my back, sort of obligatory familial way, I'm recognizing how many people have my back, that I didn't know, but now I'm starting to see. And that's it's just very flattering and humbling.
Yeah. I mean, you speak a lot about, what life hands us, and that everything is in a certain way given to us because it is part of our growth. It is part of our journey. It is part of, some people would say, our blueprint, whatever it may be. And so in your case, how does that correlate in terms of, you were orphaned, and you've had all of these experiences, and then you say, well, I don't really have family, but I do have all of these people that have my back. Yeah. Right. So it's interesting to see how everything that you you preach, you're practicing in terms of, wow, well, maybe I wasn't, given this family in this dynamic at this time in this way, but the family that I have built through my journey looks different maybe, but family nonetheless. And is that, how do you see that in terms of your own journey?
I think it's pivotal. And I think in terms of like my own transcendence of my constraints and prisons, the first powerful one, like the story that I shared at the beginning, sort of the fear of loss, was definitely synonymous with the feeling of now being alone, right? So that was sort of the bedfellow constraints, not quite the same, because one is sort of very holding, like I don't want to lose as a strategy on top of the fear of loss, and the other one is sort of feeling more isolated or no one really cares, could be a way that it would be articulated as a dialogue in my head. And so it's really shifted that in the way that I realized, no, actually, so many people care. And because I knew it intellectually, I would assert that as human beings, our primary imperative is not only to survive, that's the human level, but at the level of our being, our soul, I would assert that our true nature is to love. Like humans love to be of service. People might berate the shit out of themselves mentally, physically, emotionally. But usually you go to them and say, hey, could you help me move? Could you pick me up at the airport? Will you? Most people, certainly if they're friends or family, they want to be of service. And so now recognizing how much I've loved to do that and be there. And of course, it's so nice to hear all of this reflection when I meet people, but really allowing more contribution into my life and not sort of feeling that my value is dependent on my ability to make change, but actually is extended into allowing other people to make change for me is another form of value proposition, right? As much gratifying experience as I get from knowing that I'm making a difference in the lives of millions of people around the world, affording them the same opportunity, to not be this isolated man on an island who seems to have his shit together, which, took me a long time to get there, but I'm still a work in progress. And so to now feel this more universal feeling of family, which ironically I speak about, I feel like when you truly understand love, it extends beyond sort of the roof that we were born under, and it becomes part of humanity. So for me, it has been pivotal. And even my team, who adore me, I have quite a few people now who work with me, for me, and they are so tickled pink, as a British expression, with the ability to now recognize that, of course, I'd like to say I'm a great boss, right? I acknowledge, I love, I transform, I help, I contribute. But I'd say one of the things that they're probably most grateful for is the fact that I'm also now letting them love me, So that has been pivotal. And I think I've done a good job, as I spoke to at the beginning, of recognizing, okay, in my early years, I tried to be the cocky 20-something-year-old who was smart and eloquent and could help change lives. And there was a need of proving myself because I was on a sort of a very shallow foundation of my own inadequacies. But very early on, I realized, that's really not that powerful or confident. It's sort of the arrogance that we see,
the
particularly
energy
in men.
doesn't match, right?
No, I've always said arrogance is noisy, confidence is quiet, right?
Right.
So people are arrogant. It's like, look at what I got, my car, my boat.
I'm trying to teach that to my 10-year-old currently, yes.
Okay, good. Well, good luck. To allow the contribution, I just finished this, my mastermind, and for the first time I had these three guys who are such sweet men who have persistently kind of bombarded me with ideas and their persistence of, we want to help, we want to support. And, I didn't quite know how it would fit in. And anyway, they became kind of these mentors in the mastermind to give extra support. And so even that as a reflection, because in the very last mastermind, there's 7 modules. We meet twice a week, once every 2 weeks over the 3-month period. And the last module 7, one of them lives in Australia, one lives in America, one lives in the UK. So they're kind of perfectly spread around the world. They can address different demographics that I attract for the mastermind. But they insisted, or at least wanted to, come and fly into the States to be with me for the last module on their own dime. I offered to pay, and they're like, no, we're coming because we want to show you our commitment to you. So that felt like a microcosm of what I'm now feeling more and more with with the masses. Now, that's not to say I still don't get a couple of dumb comments if I say anything a little bit confronting for some people on Instagram. Fortunately, I don't have any haters, it seems. Maybe I do, and they don't say anything about it. But, there's still going to be the people that get triggered a bit by some of my thoughts because they don't want to be responsible. They don't really want to own how powerful they are as a human, and there's still a victim mindset out there. But for the most part, a long-winded answer to your question, I'm both feeling and allowing this universal familial love to really come into my life in spades, and it feels great.
Well, I think it's because the truth pierces through everything.
Yeah.
Pierces through all the layers of noise. The truth can also be divisive, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes those haters or those comments will find their way because truth speakers are historically divisive characters. But I think that there's such power in having the awareness that you can bring people around to the truth.
Yeah.
Right? And I'd love to actually even just address with you when people seek you out, mm-hmm. like when you're talking earlier about the demographics of people that come to find you and come to work with you.
Yeah.
And, I see you as bringing people to truth. Mm-hmm. And I think that the truth sets you free, mm-hmm. right? And when you are looking at like the demographics of the people that come to you, and you also align that with what you feel your gifts are, your purpose, your mission, the work that you're doing here, mm-hmm. what is the meeting point between those two places? Like if you were to say, I work with people with this specifically, mm-hmm. because this is what lights me up. These are my gifts. And also these are the people that come seek me out. What would you phrase that as? Gosh,
it's across the gamut. I would think the catch-all statement would be what I'm helping people with is suffering, and what I'm bringing them is freedom. Is bringing them freedom. And I distinguish suffering from pain, right? As human organisms, we're going to stub our foot on the coffee table. We're going to have a bad belly, some food. We get a headache. We get a cold, unless it is during 2020 and 2022, 23. Mm-hmm. Then there were no colds. There's no flu. The flu disappeared for a couple of years.
Right.
So pain is one thing, but what I'm helping is really suffering, which is the way that life occurs to us, the way that we see things. So perspective in that case being reality, our personal reality. It doesn't mean it's truth, but I feel it's to be honored. It doesn't mean that we believe or condone what people think or do, but that's their perspective. So I'm helping to dissolve. One of my phrases, I say I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. And so it's the dissolution of the deeper subconscious lies about ourselves, the bigger buckets of inadequacy, insecurity, or scarcity, that somehow I'm not enough or I'm not going to be okay. And, that brings suffering, from anxiety to depression to relationship worries to deep, conditions of sickness and disease. And so I dissolve all of that, which last I checked is pretty valuable. So,
well, I don't think there's a person on the planet that wouldn't raise their hand if I've asked, have you suffered or are you suffering from something? And obviously there's varying degrees on a spectrum of what that looks like. But I would love to even talk to you about the idea that suffering comes from perspective. Yeah. Suffering comes from this idea that we attach to a circumstance. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I just want to at least address your question. The last part in terms of the who or the demographic is across the map. I think anybody who's ready from the spiritual point of view, without sounding too woo or esoteric, to really transcend into a different iteration, a different frequency of themselves. A lot of people still under the guise of, okay, well, if I talk to a doctor or a shrink, and there's some certainly great humans who fulfill both of those roles. But for the most part, the world that we live in is based on experts telling you to change behavior. Like, don't do this, do this, but without looking at who are you that automatically you tend towards that behavior, right? So I've had everyone from a 13-year-old kid who's a junior golfer who kept throwing his clubs and his mum was like, how do I stop this? To this, I think a 72, 73-year-old in my mastermind who was suicidal and had attempted and was just down on life, who now is like a rock star in our community because she's so full of life and literally has an entirely new view of herself and life that she's functioning like a 20-year-old, so it's across the gamut. But people who are ready to get out of the illusion of feeling that there's something wrong with them or their life, and to discover my main product, which is true freedom. And with regards to, remind me of the second part of the next question.
Yeah. About perspective.
Oh, yes.
Being
and
what creates suffering.
So it's a bold statement, but I'm going to trust that your audience is smart enough and curious enough to maybe take it on, that there's no suffering in life, right? There's no suffering out there. For sure, there's fucking difficult circumstances. There are challenges. There is wars. There are people being killed, beheaded, blown up. There's all sorts of corruption, manipulation, sex trafficking, rapes, molestations. There's abuse. There's domestic violence. These things are abhorrent and things that would, as a man, piss me off. And if anyone ever hurt even my dog, there's a part of me that would be somewhat scared of what might come out of me, as a kill or be killed primal instinct.
Absolutely.
That we all have, right? So I always want to make sure that the caveat that people understand, and the disclaimer, is that I'm not saying your circumstances are easy, but there's no suffering in them. The suffering is in the way we relate to them. And when we can really get that, then we take on, for me, true profound responsibility, is in ways that perhaps I don't remember, I don't recall, and subjectively don't even want. I have curated these events for my soul's evolution. I would never say I wanted my dad to go to work one day and never come back because he was killed. I would never want my mum to suffer for 3 years with cancer and then die when I'm a 7-year-old. Some of the most, fragile years for a little boy relative to his mum. But nonetheless, I do see in the bigger picture that those events were pivotal and instrumental in me becoming the man of love and compassion and wanting to make a difference that I am. If my parents had stayed alive, particularly my dad, I would have fallen prey to the model that many guys do, which is staying within the auspices of what we think our dad or parent wants us to do, right? So in a way, the soul contract that we had, the three of us, for whatever reasons, was their gift to me as, like, albeit at times feeling very lost, vulnerable, and adrift at sea because I didn't have structure, I didn't have family, was simultaneously the catalyst that gave me freedom of choice, right? So really suffering in that regard is, how do I relate to life is the byproduct of suffering. Because, Milton, who was an English playwright, he had a great quote. He said, the mind is a place within itself and can make heaven of hell or hell of heaven. And so I think in ways that perhaps he articulates better than me in that sort of very succinct quote, we make of life what we make of it. And even Shakespeare said, there's nothing either good nor bad, only thinking makes it so. And so I've got so many people that I've had the pleasure of helping who have had the most abhorrent, horrific, a daughter who was raped by her own dad and his friends for years. Yeah. What do you do with that, right? And who wouldn't say, oh my gosh, she is a victim. She is somebody who is suffering, and I get it. But equally, I've seen how she transcended that and realized in ways that she totally did not choose, that was nonetheless the opportunity for her to look at what are the constraints with which I say she arrived to transcend in this lifetime. Do not condone the behavior, abhorrent, disgusting, heinous. And yet, for whatever reasons, it doesn't even make sense, that soul wanted to have that experience. So now she can become an advocate. She can become a voice for people going through the same thing.
Yes.
She can see how resourceful she is, how strong she is, how external circumstances don't have to define us. We don't have to be victims. So that's where perspective to me is the synonymous perspective or the synonymous viewpoint that is the catalyst for suffering. Suffering being more intellectual and emotional. Again, does not mitigate or in any way dismiss the challenge of life and the pain of life, right? And
I think you're drawing a really important distinction here.
Yeah.
And that is sort of the human existence and the spiritual opportunity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, yes, on the human existence plane, we are talking about abhorrent, awful, inexcusable behavior and choices.
Yeah.
And we're also simultaneously, with some cognitive dissonance here, holding the idea that there is a spiritual opportunity that is meant for specifically us to grow and to learn from it. And I mean, I can say, even most, I've obviously had a ton of experiences in my life that were humanly excruciating. Yeah. But most recently, going through cancer and going through chemotherapy and having radiation and having massive surgery and, being terrified of, leaving my 2 kids the way your mom, I'm sure, felt leaving you. And, and yet through the human suffering, because I know I'm aware of, and awareness being our superpower, I'm not oblivious to the spiritual opportunity in that. I was able to see it and access it almost immediately. The day I got my diagnosis. So I really want to double click on what you're talking about, which is that it is both. And that perspective, and I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying, and have studied this for many years with a lot of people who believe along the lines that we do, that everything is just a circumstance until we attach meaning to it.
Yes. And also at a subtler level, which again is so human and for which we can have compassion and understanding, desire for it to be different, right?
Absolutely.
Because that's where the real suffering comes in perspective is life is the way it is. Again, I write in quotes. So I say life is the way it is, but only always. Right. And it's sort of a way to, both in a tongue-in-cheek way, but also in a very profound way, to recognize you're fighting reality. And that's usually, or not usually, it's always a losing proposition. So the degree to which people can truly see that their life the way it is right now is the way it is, and you're not a victim of it. In fact, quite the opposite, maybe not in the ways that you're aware of, but you have, through your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, at some level manifested the current circumstances which you might be at some level fighting. So it's sort of, the nonsensical way of recognizing that, oh, wait a minute, wherever I go, there are the results of my choices. It's like, well, yeah, duh, wherever you go, there you are. And the life that I have, of course, there are outside circumstances where life is curating certain events. I again assert from the perspective of helping you to overcome and transcend constraints, that if you can reframe that whole thing, whatever you're going through, as hard as it is, and I acknowledge you obviously done enough work that even when you got this diagnosis, you were able to immediately reframe it in a way that you weren't a victim of a disease, but rather, okay, what are you trying to show me here, life? What resentment, what anger am I holding on to? What way have I not been taking care of my physical vehicle? Whatever your way of relating to that gave you an empowering conversation and narrative versus a disempowering, because the exponential growth of a cancer usually after a diagnosis is synonymous with that victimhood, right? It's like, oh no, worst case scenario. And so the energy that was the precursor to the cancer developing now only gets exacerbated by virtue of the fear that was really already there, right? The dis-ease that I talk about, the absence of ease, which is suffering. If I'm relating to life as a victim, then you have to be in a mild to severe state of fight or flight, which is why I tell people, you can't have true health until you free your mind. And I'm saying that at a biohacking conference where people are dropping 10, 20, 30 grand on equipment because they want to be the best version of themselves. I'm like, that's awesome. I'm all for it. I have a hyperbaric chamber. I do red light saunas, all the things, right? But I know that my health and vitality is so much more commensurate with my mindset than it is with the activities and amenities that I have in terms of like my workouts and diet. And so simultaneously suffering to me, when you realize, oh, hang on a minute, I am my own worst enemy, not my circumstances, and the degree to which I carry a frequency of fear, disdain for myself, the absence of love and kindness is the precursor to how that actually starts to get manifest in my real life, right? And often we have it the other way around, which is I'll be fine when my circumstances change versus when I'm fine, my circumstances will meet me there. And that's a hard thing for people to grasp because it takes a lot of responsibility and accountability, which the default setting of the ego is victimhood. So people don't want to take that on. It's sort of I tell people, yeah, seeing is believing, but that's also called waiting. Mm-hmm. Versus believing is seeing is the precursor to being a creator. Mm-hmm. And these are big jumps for people to take. Huge. And I have compassion if they don't want to yet, or they're not ready, or they don't feel they have the strength or the resources or the confidence or the self-belief to do it. That's okay. But still understand the sort of formulaic approach to creation. Because whether you're reacting to life or not, you're still the creator of that, right? You're pissed off at your in-laws, you're pissed off at your boss. It looks like it's out there, but that's still a victim mindset. And you are, whether you realize it or not, creating the reaction to that. And
I think that people tend to judge, right? They tend to judge everything. They judge the resources they judge themselves for the resources they think they don't have, and they judge themselves for the resources they think they do.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times I'll ask somebody, well, what does that mean? Okay, well then what will happen as a result of that? If they come with a problem. Okay, well, what about that bothers you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if that comes true, then what will happen? Okay, well, if that comes true, and usually at the end of the series of questions, we always arrive at the original knot in the sweater that we're unraveling, which is, I'm afraid that I'm going to be in pain or suffering without the resources to do anything about it. And I'm going to die that way.
Yeah. Not realizing, and a very powerful distinction that you point out for people, is that the very thing they're fearful of in this pain or suffering, or that they're not going to be taken care of, is the experience that they have currently.
Yes.
Internally, which is what is the genesis of the thought to worry about it. So,
exactly.
A friend of mine, he said, I do everything to avoid confrontation. I said to him, for that reason, you're in a constant state of confrontation.
Exactly.
And he's like, holy shit, I didn't even realize that, right?
Yep.
So the very things that we're avoiding, we're actually clinging to at a very deep level. And when people see that, I just actually had a beautiful call with a client this morning, really successful, amazing man, big-hearted, beautiful family. And I pointed out some things about his relationship, and he's like, oh my God, like, I didn't even see that. And I'm like, that for that reason, there's no shame and guilt. Again, you can't be held accountable for that which you're oblivious to, but it's kind of hurts. It's a bit of an owie when you realize you're a man who's doing one thing, saying one thing, but what you're really up to energetically underneath that is something quite different. And when you see that juxtaposition between how you declare yourself to be, conversely how you're actually behaving, if you're committed to being a powerful, loving, kind human being who's functioning from freedom and love, it's hard to look at. But it takes a big man. In his case, he really took it on the chin. He's like, I can't wait to, in this case, speak to his partner and say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Not in a way that he's at fault, but it's not what he's truly committed to. So to be able to see,
because even in the word "I'm sorry" is a judgment, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny how it's slippery. It's a slippery slope. How we attach a judgment to anything, right? And to everything. And even when I say like the resources piece of it, it's like, if I ask somebody, well, what are you afraid of, in the questioning, what are you afraid is going to happen? Well, I'm afraid I'll have a mental breakdown. Great. Why are you judging having a mental breakdown? It means that your nervous system needs a break, and it's creating one for you because you're not giving one to yourself.
Yeah.
So why are you judging that as a resource? It's a beautiful resource. Yeah. It's your body's brilliant, miraculous way of taking care of you.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just so funny how any single thing in life we can place a judgment on. And we so often do because we feel like that's a protection mechanism. But would you say that that's actually blocking us from freedom?
100%, because the primary way that the ego, going back to perspective is reality, perspective is suffering, is the energy of resistance, right?
Yeah.
If we really break down to understand the mechanics of suffering in everyday life, we could argue that there's two predominant perspectives that are in play. One, I have something I don't want, right? And everyone can fill in the blank. I have a diagnosis, I have a sickness, I have a parent who's about to die, I have the absence of a relationship, I have a partner who doesn't appreciate me, I have kids who don't listen to me. Whatever it is that we have that we don't want is one form of suffering. And then the other is I don't have what I do want. Right. And so when you really break it down to its most fundamental components, it's really kind of both liberating, comical, but also relatively being a imperative word there, easy to start to see where is that at play in our own lives, right? So then you go, oh, I'm basically resisting life. And that energy of resistance is really one of the pillars of the ego's primordial imperative, is to be right? Because it has to be right, because the very nature of the ego is a pretense, it's a lie. So it needs evidence in order to sustain its own perspective, which is always founded in some inadequacy, insecurity, or scarcity. So I'm always joking with clients. I'm like, yeah, congratulations, you get to be right about the fact that your life doesn't work. Like, what an awesome thing to fight for.
Right.
And they're like, it's so dumb. I'm like, yeah, because you're not even doing it. It's automated. It's an unconscious process.
It's a virus running in the background.
Yeah, it's that default network, that we call ego, identity, persona, whatever you want to call it, which to me is the opportunity that we're here to transcend. Everyone's got one.
Yes.
It's people are like trying to get rid of the ego and all of the, that's fine. It's less about getting rid of for me, and it's sort of allowing, it's loving, it's including, it's incorporating. Like, who doesn't have
Transcend
a physical...
and include, yeah.
Yeah, who doesn't have a physical scar on their body just by virtue of being human, especially guys, kids, running around. I mean, I played soccer and all sports. I don't know how many scars I had growing up, and are still there to some degree. They don't define me, and I'm not worried about them, right? Because it's been integrated. So equally, if I can see that I had a fear of loss, okay, who's going to begrudge me that based on the fact that my parents died? Everyone would have hopefully compassion and understanding. And I'm not trying to get rid of it. Oh, that's a problem. It's like, no, that's actually a beautiful part of my humanity, where I can now have so much more sympathy and compassion for people who go through the same thing. I just don't want to be defined by it, where I have to pretend to be some perfect boyfriend or perfect client, counselor, where I'm not losing people, right? It's still there, but it's integrated. So that's where the real work to me is not in getting rid of, denying, overcoming, disproving, but actually developing what I would assert is true love, which is that I'm big enough of a human being with a greater capacity to love that includes the parts of me that don't feel lovable.
Well, and there's that word parts, right? It's the parts work. It's the parts work, where it's a part of you. It's not all of who you are.
Yeah.
And that's how you transcend and include. And I think that that's a really key point to highlight for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes work, but I think it's also such a beautiful design when you get it, right?
Yeah.
Because I love love. I always said that even from a young age, and certainly intimate romantic relationships have been the catalyst for my own growth and evolution. And I think, without sounding too poetic, that our true nature is love. And so
I agree.
What better means by which we get to recognize that, realize it, actualize it, and live from it than to have this flawed, imperfect version of ourselves, which is, for that reason, the greatest conduit to develop real love. Because who doesn't love their greatest features? Like a woman who's got great cheekbones, great hair, great boobs, great butt, whatever it is that they like about themselves. But then they've got the parts of them that they don't like, the shape of their nose, their ankles, their feet, or whatever, wherever they're in their life. There's the opportunity. It's easy to love the parts of you you like, but what an opportunity to develop love for the parts of you that you don't. And that, to me, is why being human is such a great opportunity, because we're all flawed. We're all imperfect. We're all going to have our conversations of inadequacy. And that is, to me, the catalyst for us to develop true love, which is embracing of all of us.
It's interesting. In the Soul Sway practice that I co-founded, one of the things that we do in the many things that we offer is a soul body scan. And the way that I define that is soul is our source of unconditional love. It's an acronym.
Yeah.
And how are we bringing that to our body? And in a very embodied, very present way, in the here and the now, scanning for the parts that we do have maybe an egoic love or appreciation for, scanning for the parts that we don't.
Yeah.
And from that human experience, bringing in that spiritual opportunity of bringing more of that unconditional love to our physical body in a really present way.
Yeah.
And that circles me to this idea of, I've heard you speak before about, presence being, I'll use the word, an antidote to all of this suffering in a lot of ways. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, and first of all, I'm going to, say that I will happily steal the source of unconditional love from you. I love that. So I just want to acknowledge that. And,
yes, I actually think that I got that from Dr. DeMartini, but yeah.
Yeah. So, no, I always like to acknowledge the source of things, but that's a beautiful way. And I love anagrams, so I played with it myself, but that is really beautiful. So I just wanted to presence that.
Yes.
But presence to me is... It really is a portal into the end of suffering by virtue of getting rid of psychological time, right? So past and future are just iterations for me of this conversation that the ego loves, right? Holding on to traumas that we haven't reconciled, and perhaps rightly so, because they were very difficult to process at an age where we didn't have the resources or the wherewithal, and we just had to cope. And then that gets superimposed. Again, one of my quotes, I say, past hurt informs future fear. So now the future conversations are typically, because it's a survival mechanism of the brain, is to avoid the repetition of things that hurt us. It makes sense. without realizing, oh, I'm actually propagating and sustaining the very things that I'm now trying to avoid, right? So when we step into true presence, we're actually sort of reconciling any psychological conversation about time, past or future. And this is why when people say, time flies when you're having fun, which is really the byproduct of the fact that I wasn't giving any attention to my history or my future. I was fully engaged with what I was doing. I think why people love surfing or sports, or obviously when you're sitting with a loved one or a friend who you just have the best time with, or people even enjoy the sort of dabbling with microdosing of psychedelics, or they go on plant journeys where they get this glimpse of the divine, the unity of everything that transcends all of these psychological illusions that people get stuck in where suffering exists. So presence, it's so seductive, it's so subtle, and every one of my athletes has sort of sought it in their own way. Like the flow state, being in the zone, is often really another acronym or way of describing or analogous with, the presence that you have when you're fully engaged with what you're doing. And I hear so many people like say, be here, be in the now. And even Eckhart Tolle's whole career has been dedicated to the now, right? And it's true. But to me, the best way to get to presence is not as an instruction, as an efforting, as a trying, as an attempt to be here, but rather to dissolve where you're preoccupied with everything that's not present. Then presence is the effortless byproduct of me reconciling, mitigating any attention I give to unresolved trauma or the perception of future suffering. In the absence of both of those, presence is.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I'll even add that from an embodiment perspective, so much of that ability to be present is even just being sensualized. And the other day, somebody was telling me how they just have so much anxiety and it's hard for them to be present, and they're constantly ejecting or evacuating and, dissociating in their own way. And she's like, even I'm having a hard time being here now. I was like, feel your feet on the floor.
Yeah.
Ground it down into your feet and actually feel what is touching your feet. Feel the weight of your body in your feet. Feel where your feet are connecting with the earth. Where are you now? Oh, I'm fully here.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And this is the meeting place of all worlds.
Yeah.
Past, present, future. It's right here, right now. Like I can feel that, you know?
Yeah.
And so I really love that, you're talking about being at a biohacking conference and going, your body isn't the only part, of the equation here. Like your mind is part of your body. Are you addressing it?
Yeah.
Right? Your soul is inherent in this, physicalized version of you. It is the energy in which this body moves through life. Like it is the purpose that this body's mission is on. So I love that you are, holding people accountable to taking radical responsibility for all of what is creating their reality, and the fact that they are the ones in the driver's seat. I think that's everything.
Thank you.
That's
and
everything.
it takes a very delicate hand, because I always say, there's different forms of love, and I always like to start with more the maternal feminine, which is like, if somebody falls over, a kid's got an hour, he's riding his bike and he fell over and grazed his knee, or she hurt her elbow or something. The maternal instinct is to come in there with this sort of very loving, nurturing, holding energy of like, come here, it's okay,
Absolutely.
do the sort of the pampering love, which is required when someone's hurt. So if you're now listening to a friend who's suffering, I really invite you to consider, just hold space. It's okay. Even if you know that what they're talking about is nonsensical, you don't believe it, that's their reality, and it warrants, the reverence of your listening to that to me is the greatest gift of love. Then we can come in with the paternal, which is sort of more my tough love, and especially if I've got a relationship with someone over time, my athletes who need a kick in the ass and stop feeling sorry for yourself. But there is sort of, I think there's a hierarchy in the way that we deliver that. And I do feel that's where the accountability and the responsibility, which is, it's an empowering way to speak to someone. It's like saying, hey, you're extraordinary, be responsible for that shit, is one of the ways that I term it, right? Which to the ego can feel confronting. It's like, yeah, but I want to blame somebody else. And it's no. And it's like, I get it, but that's your child. You're 30, you're 40, you're 50. We can make space for that. But let's take the child out of the driving seat, put them in the freaking seat in the back, and you start to like actually take ownership,
Yeah.
So, and that is accountability, and there's a time and a place where somebody could really be going through something right now that is so difficult that they don't have the wherewithal, the means, the confidence, or the sense of self-belief that they can handle it. And, you know, if someone's sick, they've been injured, they're really struggling with a disease, and for sure, we all need to come together as a village and support that person. But there will come a time and a place, there is a tipping point where it's important to sort of shift back into, oh, hang on a minute, I'm a sovereign being, curating of the events of my life in ways that I'm oblivious to, because of course we had to forget, why did I attract this difficult situation? Otherwise we don't need to go through the process like, oh yeah, that's right, I set this up because I'm trying to learn. You have to be engaged, otherwise you don't get the lesson, right? Sort of.
Yeah, I call it fierce love, only because my clients have told me over the years that that's how my love shows up, is fiercely. And I will say that it always does come back to the inner child, right? Yeah. And now as a parent and having a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old and seeing in real time, yes, when the tantrum is happening, when the fall just happened or the argument just happened and they are in their feelings. Yeah. That is, my husband will come in and try to rationalize with them. I'm like, this is not the time to get the lesson. Yeah. They're not even going to hear it. They're not even going to be able to process it. We've got to just hold them in the feelings. We've got to meet them where they are in the feelings.
Amazing.
And then we can get to the deeper rooted stuff and the dissolving, right? Rather than just the solving. Yeah. But it's amazing to see it in these little humans playing out when I'm also doing it with the adults.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Still the same mechanism. Even like you were saying, I was thinking as you shared, whether it's a friend or a client who has the anxiety and you gave her the real great like coaching instruction of like putting your feet on the ground and being here, which is beautiful. And, you know, that's sort of the present state of maternal, hey, be with me, it's okay. And simultaneously recognizing, okay, anxiety to me as an experience that is, by the sounds of it, quite regular for her. There's something that is pulling her attention, which she's perceiving the world as a potential threat.
Correct.
And that would speak to the environment she grew up in, where there was these mercurial outbreaks. Maybe the dad screamed, the parents did whatever. She didn't feel safe as a kid. And so until that part of her is seen, addressed, investigated, integrated, then she's always going to be pulled back to, she lives here as a human on, you know, this gong show planet Earth. And that's always going to be perceived as potentially dangerous until she can go, oh, hang on a minute, that's the lens I'm looking through. That's the perspective creating my suffering, to go back to the early.
It's the macro and the micro, right? The micro was just feel your feet on the floor and be here now and know that it's possible. Oh, it is possible. Great. Now let's get into the macro of this. Yeah. Now that you're here now, let's dive in. Yeah. So, I think, again, to your point, it's the whole universe of self. Yeah. And having all of the different ways to get into the core of it and see what the world is being built on. Yeah. And how we're going to have it spin moving forward. Yeah. Okay. We could just keep talking and talking and talking. All right. So facing forward on our timeline, we've visited the past. We've sat really deliciously in the present. Yeah. Facing forward on the timeline in the horizon of the world of Peter Crone and what you're creating and the mind architect and your thought leadership and all of these things, what is coming? What is down the pike? I mean, I know we've hinted at a book and this and that, but big scale vision, what's on the horizon? I
love it. It's a great question and something I'm still in the contemplative phase of. I think it's an ongoing proposition, right? Because as we grow, our goalposts move a little bit. But for me, short term, you know, to get some good rest after my trip, being all around the world, take care of my vehicle, my meat suit. And but the book for sure, the recent platform I just created, it's a new offering, which I'm really excited about, called Freedom, being as that's my main product.
Love.
Is I'd say akin to a conscious Netflix, right? Where right, Netflix has got all of whatever, you know, people obviously have their favorite people and fans and shows, but for the most part, it's like, you know, narrative stories, a lot of abuse and violence often these days, it seems, whereas mine is dedicated to this process of awakening, getting beyond suffering, overcoming anxiety. I have a workshop on anxiety, depression, relationships, health. So it's sort of my archive of 70 plus hours of content. I do a monthly Q&A for people in the community. There's a wisdom library, there's clips, there's all my Instagram lives. It's just this one-stop shop for everything that you could probably want in terms of ending suffering, discovering more love, freedom, possibility, and vitality. So that's only been around for 2 months. So we're still in the very early stages, but the one thing that is actually the feedback is so beautiful is people say this is the safest place I've ever felt in my life, because there's a community component to it where people share, and the love and support that everybody gets from everybody else, because it's like-minded people who've got their versions of traumas and sufferings and struggles and problems. But the lack of judgment is such a unique experience for people. There isn't the hatred, there isn't the judgment, there isn't the wrong making. So that alone, and I wanted to make it super affordable because not a lot of my stuff is, or I'm not. I've gotten to this sort of economic supply and demand, which is a nice place for me, but this is $29 a month. So that I'm really excited about future, growing that, building a community that feels safe, particularly for women. That tends to be the majority of my audience, I think 70%. But also educating men how to provide that for their women, for their mom, for their wife, for their sisters. And it's beautiful. So that's a big part of the future, the book. I'm also looking at some very big projects in tech of how to scale my work. So I've got a group that came to me and they're like looking at some AI stuff and how can we reach more people on scale at an even cheaper price point to reach people who would otherwise never get to my work. I've just got a little bit of a clothing line that's fun. Like, it's not really like, I know it's still on brand, and it has a quote down the spine of the t-shirts and these cool cloaks that just says, I am freedom. So it's sort of a declaration of cool clothing, sustainable, beautifully made. And yeah, at the same time, it's sort of a way of voicing my commitment on top of what you wear as a wardrobe, both for the mind and for the body. I got people who want me to do a supplement line. I'm not going to do a line, but I do have a good idea for something that would be really helping people to tap into their cognitive abilities in a way that make them not like Adderalls and all of the shit that pharma pumps out, but something that's based in, because my Ayurveda background is part of what I do with people and work, is to incorporate some of these really clean organic products that help people to truly be here, right? Like literally, like as a support for your mental, emotional faculties. So there's a lot going on, and then I'm being pulled to Australia, to Italy, to Spain, to England. And so I'm really, I think more than anything, what I'm excited about is what I don't know is yet to come. Sort of going full circle to how we started this conversation, realizing I don't know. And yet that itself is the seed of ultimate possibility.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to pose the final question that we always pose here. Okay. And that is, if I had a mirror, and a handheld mirror, and I handed it to you, and you were to gaze into that mirror, what is it that you would most want to say to yourself in recognition of your journey thus far, of all the yous that you have been up until this moment in time, of all of the resources you've used, of all the resilience you've had, of all of the knowledge and wisdom that you've gained? What is that moment of acknowledgement and validation, that moment of look at me now? What would you say to yourself in that mirror?
Wow, I didn't know that was part of your process. This is your Barbara Walters moment, right? Is this where you get everyone to cry? That's a beautiful question. I've never had that posed to me, to give a really authentic response. I think what I would say is, in the face of what many would argue was a very challenging childhood, to have both parents die at such, significant times of my life, 7, mother, 17, kind of trying to find my step into independence and adulthood with the father figure as a man who obviously I revered, and especially as we had a decade together without my mum, so we became incredibly close, and he was such an extraordinary father. I would use the word pride, how proud I am. Might be a long-winded answer, but I hope that's okay. Because I can remember when I first went to school, college, university, I was denied 4 times from the same college. And I don't know what possessed me. Well, that just gave me chills. I don't know what possessed me as an 18-year-old, because my dad died when I was doing what's called A-levels in school, different SETs or whatever they call it, STEs or whatever.
SATs. Yeah.
SETs, I was right the first time. Okay. So I was doing 4 A-levels, typically you did 3 back in the day, and they thought that I had the acumen to be able to do a 4th. And yeah, my dad died, and it was a major disaster where, almost a couple hundred people died in this national disaster. And so I was away from school for about 3 months. And so I didn't get the grades that I was predicted to go to Oxford and Cambridge or whatever. And so when we submit applications, you pick 5 colleges, I think it was. And my first was this place called Loughborough University. And I didn't get selected. And so you can go into a secondary process called clearing, because not everybody who put that particular school as their first choice ended up picking it. So it's kind of like a flight. Sometimes they oversell seats because they know a lot of people might cancel or whatever. So the clearing process is hopefully, let's say 200 people applied to my particular department and only 197 actually showed up or chose that school. They have a couple of openings. That didn't work. I didn't get into that. So I decided to take a year off to study. I went into a bank, and they had this special program where you could go for everything from being in the back room counting cash and putting it in bundles, to being a clerk, to being an assistant manager in a bank. And it was just a great learning experience, pretty common in Europe to take a year out. So then I went back through the process and got denied twice again. And as an 18, 19-year-old, I remember standing in the kitchen. We had a landline on the wall, and had to turn and all the damn numbers. And I called the department at the college, and the professor of genetics picked up, Dr. Ward. And I explained my case. I said, I am an only child. My dad died last year, or 18 months ago. And for that reason, I missed out on a lot of my schooling, and I didn't get the grades I was predicted. And in a way that I felt was confident but not arrogant, I said that I promise you as a commitment that I'm as good as, if not better, as any of the students you've already accepted. And again, looking back, I'm like, the audacity of that kid, but I'm so proud of him. And so the professor really listened, for which I'm so grateful. And he said, let me talk to the head of department and I'll call you back tomorrow. And sure enough, he, a man of his word, he called back and he said, we made a space for you. And, it could get me teary, but and what's crazy is I'd never even visited the school. Like, you normally canvass, you go around, check out places, but I just knew. And I think the real icing on the cake, first of all, I remember the first class I had in genetics, which was, I don't know when, but within that first week, I studied human biology and exercise physiology. I remember sitting at my desk, and Dr. Ward was the teacher, and he walked around all of the desks and he was giving whatever handout. And he got to my desk, he put the handout down, and he said, I'm glad you made it. And so I think that as a representation of perhaps the tenacity that I've had in the face of a lot of adversity is, if I was looking in the mirror, I'd be like, you did all right, And I feel that got confirmed a couple of times. As I said, I might wax on a little bit here because it's a beautiful question. But the first break in Christmas from that first semester, a friend who I'd never met before but became close to at college, he said, what do you do for the holidays? Are you going home to spend Christmas with your family? And I said, no, actually, I'm going to go, I do a bit of ski guiding. And he's like, oh, you don't spend time with your family? I said, I don't have family. And he's like, what? He's like, you don't even have sisters or brother? I said, no, only child, my parents died. He's like, holy shit. He said, if you lined up all 15,000 students and said one of them doesn't have any family, you'd be the last person I pick, because you're just so upbeat and you're like one of the most inspiring people I've met. And so that was also a point of real beautiful confirmation of that. Even in the face of adversity, I didn't go to, perhaps down the path most traveled of, bitterness and anger and self-loathing or feeling sorry for myself. And I think just to sort of wrap that up as a beautiful testament to that conviction and discipline, I went on and did a master's at the school. It was 3-year undergrad, and then I stayed and did a master's. And between that transition at the end of my undergrad, I got awarded the highest accolade to any student in the college. the Sir Robert Martin Prize, and the actual tagline or way that they delineated it was the most outstanding the most outstanding student of all round achievement. So it wasn't just academia. I'd contributed a lot. I was the chairman of my dorm and then the chairman of all the chairmans, and contributed a lot to the school in a way of my my gratitude for the fact that I was given that opportunity. So I haven't told that story, more than half a dozen times to friends. So thank you for pulling it out of me, albeit a little bit emotional. So that really, is something that I could look back on and really pat myself on the back, that no one would have begrudged me if I'd, God forbid, become a bit of a drunk or, thought that life was unfair and I was a victim. And instead I turned it into a calling and a purpose to help people see how extraordinary they are, even in the face of great adversity. And I think the last point within the continuation of that, I can remember when I went through another breakup that was pivotal in a different way. The first one was the most powerful, the fear of loss, and realizing the mechanisms that had made my behaviors a little bit inauthentic, not terrible. I was just becoming an even better boyfriend. No one would begrudge me, and she was certainly very grateful, and subsequently reached out years later and has said some of the most beautiful things anyone has ever said to me about who I was for her in that period, because she had gone through a lot and I helped her. But another relationship later on, again, a younger girl, and she realized, look, you take care of everything. And she was wise beyond her years. She said, I want to struggle. I want to know what it's like to not be able to pay rent. And you kind of are just so generous and you take care of anything. And I was like, wow, talk about somebody who really knew what they wanted to grow through and learn from. But nonetheless, it left me in a painful place. And I was, why do good guys kind of end up, quote unquote, not getting the girls? Is a very cliche way of looking at life. And I can remember crying one night at dinner with a friend because I'd been through some stuff, and she then had announced that she was now seeing someone and couldn't be in, for a little while we stayed in touch. It's a long story. I hope you're okay.
I'm great with it, yeah.
Okay, good. Apparently it's a big mirror. I don't typically talk about myself, so I guess this is kind of nice. But she, very honorably, out of respect to the person she'd just started dating, said, we love each other dearly. We've been in touch, but out of respect to this new person, I'm not going to be in touch. And that was kind of like the last sort of dagger for me of feeling in that case, he was better than me, and my not good enough, my lie of some inadequacy came to the surface and was very healing. But the point is, I was having dinner with a friend and I kind of got teary and I said, hey, I'm going to excuse myself and just go to my hotel. I was here for a workshop or something, and I went to bed, feeling that my capacity to care, because I really felt like I was one of the most caring people you could meet, was such a weakness, because I felt, God, if I, and I've heard it subsequently so many times from athletes who said, God, I just wish I didn't care so much, for whatever failures and shortcomings they've had in their career and their profession. And I remember waking up, bolt upright in the middle of the night, having cried myself to sleep, and I realized, holy shit, my caring is a superpower. And I realized the distinction at that point, the difference between caring, which anatomically is centered in our chest, in our heart, the most powerful organ, and yet worry was what I was attached to. And at that point, I realized, no, I care so much. And I know it sounds weird, but I felt like every cog of the universe like realign itself, as though it was like, finally, you fucking see you the way we see you, which is someone who is so loving and so kind. And again, it's not to say I've always been like that. I'm sure past girlfriends would say, no, he's sometimes not been that considerate because I'm human.
Yeah.
Or I was reactive. But that's something I'm really proud of, is that I realized from a very young age, I was very sensitive, very shy as a kid. And for some reason, that same sentiment or quality has just manifested in a way that shows up as really caring about other people and genuinely wanting to help them, and really seeing how much hurt and suffering there is, and just feeling very grateful for my tenacity, my commitment, and the reflection I now get of the many, many lives that I get the privilege of impacting and changing. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I got teary too.
Yeah.
What a magical story. I mean, the fact that you were able to conjure that, I'm going to term it healthy arrogance and self-advocacy in that really pivotal moment is so inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and even in reflection, maybe there was an underlying sense of fear and desperation too. I think, in those formative years, much of my life was dedicated, like all of us, to just making it, especially with no resources, like I was back against the wall. If I don't do it, who will? And that's something that, to your question earlier about this familial love now, feeling the support of the universe, I didn't have that for decades. I really thought, if I don't do it, I've got no one who's got my back. Like a lot of people can go home, or they're in a breakup, they sleep on their brother's couch, for a while they lick their wounds. And I was always by myself. And I think that's also, I remember standing in my bedroom when it happened and just crying. And it was the visceral experience of alone. It's not the feeling of alone. People can be married with kids and they feel alone, right? But I was alone. And it's the worst experience a human being can have. And it's why I remember at school, whenever a kid came who was a new transfer from somewhere, and kids were often, as they can be, pretty horrific and mean, I would always befriend the person. I never wanted them to feel alone. And I think that in ways served me now, where I recognize that the fundamental kind of structure of an ego is isolation, separation. And I think that's why I have so much compassion, because even though someone might have the best family, even their parents are still alive, and they're good parents, and they have beautiful kids, and they're successful businesses, but if they're still looking through the eyes of the isolated, at least the illusion of separation of the ego, then you're going to suffer.
I mean, isn't suffering sort of like, to wrap this up, in a way, the fear of not being unconditional love, being unconditionally loved, lovable, loving, and a big part of that is centered in belonging.
It's primal. I mean, it's so deep in our DNA, because back in the day, if you weren't accepted by the tribe and you're kicked out, there are bigger predators out there, so it occurs as life or death. Nowadays, of course, as not to in any way belittle or dismiss it, you can jump on Tinder and you've got a million people ready to date,
right.
So, but that's how it feels in our wiring. And it is, and I feel
primitive.
That's part of my work, is to help dispel the illusion of separation that is the catalyst for so much suffering and hurt, and why people, it's something I've helped so many people with, the suicidal ideations or even attempts, where it is that part of us. It's not we want to die, but it's the part of us that does. And that part of us is just looking for love and acceptance. Ironically, we look in the wrong place, which is outside of us.
Right, instead of in the mirror.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's, hopefully something that I help people discover is, as I said earlier, if you can love all parts of you, including the part of you that doesn't feel lovable,
we come in alone and we leave alone, and all we really truly have 24/7, 365 in between is ourselves.
Yeah.
So you've got to turn to the only place you can truly count on, and that's inside first. So beautiful work, sir. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing everything that you've shared, for doing the work that you're doing in the world, which is beyond necessary. And I want this to be the beginning of, anybody that's listening to this, either continuing their relationship with you or beginning a relationship with you that they'll have for a lifetime. So where can people find you?
Thank you. And I appreciate the kind words and the listening and the hospitality of having me here, and also just the question that, got me pretty teary there at the end. So it's nice for me to show my humanity as I started with. So
It is imperative. I appreciate your humility because it is something that, having the history that I have had, I have worked with many thought leaders, celebrities and such, and humility is one of the first things to go. So I really appreciate your humility and your willingness to be so authentic. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that. In terms of finding me, just my name, petercrone.com for website goers, and at Peter Crone for Instagram, and same on Facebook. I think Peter Crone, the Mind Architect.
We'll put these in the show notes as well.
Yes. And I'd love for people to check out Freedom, because, as I said, it's my attempt to make things super affordable. My mastermind, it's a bigger commitment. It's a 3-month program. It's me coaching and teaching. And so it's a lot bigger endeavor, but at least $29 a month for 70, 80 plus hours of inspiring content and a community that is, as I said, so unique, provides so much love and safety in a world that seems to be desperately lacking of both of those. That's something I'm really proud of and will continue to contribute more and more quality content to.
No brainer, people.
Yeah.
No brainer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, and honored. And that's it for today, everybody. Signing off. Look at me now. See you next time.
Join us for Look at Me Now, wherever you listen to podcasts, and be sure to share, like, and subscribe.